There's a logical explanation for everything. Well, that's what my father always said. Of course, he doesn't know what happened to me and my buddies while camping in the woods 9 years ago. Why should he? Adults, and most especially parents, mistake traumatic events as an overwhelming experience for your age, or something that your brain can't handle, or simple imagination. But what happened to me those years ago still scares me to this very day, and it was no imagination. I just graduated high school, and my friends and I were about to go our separate ways in life. It just felt too soon. They were already talking about careers and colleges, and this scared me because the thoughts of never seeing them again were very overwhelming. So when I suggested the thought of a week-long camping trip for one last get-together, they all said yes. We decided to camp in the woods near glacier-filled lakes deep in the wilderness. We graduated early in the summer, so we still had some time before the hot temperatures rolled in. We spent a while planning the trip, from how much food we needed to exactly where we would be camping. This day would be for around a week, if not 5 days, which would mean we were going to have to pack a lot. After packing and deciding the spot where we would set up camp, we set off. The lake was not too far from where we lived. It was only around a 2-hour drive, and the roads were easy enough to navigate. Once you hear the bussing of dirt bikes and all that good stuff, you know that you're not too far away. Then you start seeing the greenish-blue sagebrush, and you know you're getting very close. It was me, my 3 other friends, and for privacy reasons, I'll be calling them Jack, Ryan, and Jacob. All 4 of us inch closer and closer to the gate that separated us from the country and the glacier-filled lake. So I stepped out of the car while everyone else waited, and I undid the metal crate. Going back into the truck and driving into the woods, the roads were extremely rough, almost like they hadn't been used or had been overused. We could hear all the stuff in the trailer bumping around and shuffling around due to the massive rocks and bumps in the road. Everyone was doing that thing 5-year-old kids do when their parents drive over bumpy roads. They make that annoying vocal noise that goes up and down. I thought it was childish at first, but then I eventually found myself joining along. We reached the turnoff on the dirt road that led us to the site we were camping at. This road took us very far from the main road. The road didn't look too bad. There were some divots in the road, but nothing worse than the one we had just driven on. So I made the gentle swerve on that road toward our campsite. After an hour of driving, we could start to see our campsite in the distance. After driving closer and closer, we noticed a foul stench that grew stronger and stronger. It smelled like a rotting carcass that has been stuck in the sun all day. Jacob, whose eyes were watering at this point, started gagging because of how strong the aroma had become. The stench was so strong that all of us started gagging as well. Now the smell was most likely the rotting body of an antelope or something like that. After 3.5 hours of a bumpy and stench-filled drive, we made it to the site. It was smaller than the pictures looked, but it had enough room for all of us. Without a single word, Ryan opened the trailer and was quickly buried by the misplaced objects that were thrown around while driving. Instead of helping him, we just stood there laughing our asses off because of how stupid he looked. I think he even cracked a smile despite being underneath the grill. Eventually, we all got our cool and started helping him out of this mess and started laying everything out. Our tents were spaced out about 4 feet apart to where we wouldn't be able to hear each other snoring. At around 5:30, we had finished packing, and we were already getting dinner ready. We were eating smoked BBQ ribs for dinner, and the stench made our mouths water. We kept all the food that we needed to be preserved in a suitcase-sized cooler that weighed roughly 70 pounds with ice in them. Soon, there was no sound and light except the lanterns and Christmas lights we had around our campsites, and the old wireless radio we had. We all sat around the campfire telling stories and figuring out what we were going to do with our lives. After eating, which filled us up plenty, I told Jack, who was also the chef and in charge of food, to put the ribs in the cooler and put the ribs away in the trailer. He said all right with a boozy and drunk tone in his voice, even though we didn't bring any alcohol with us, so we all got in our tents and say goodnight to each other. Weapon-wise, all I brought was a .22. I didn't want anything really crazy, but I also wanted something for protection, you know. A .22, regardless of what anybody says, will take you down if you get a good shot in you. During packing, I pretended the gun was for shooting gophers, but my friend knew I was lying. That night, I felt suffocated, nauseous from a putrid stench like a rotting corpse. Others vomited too, and we heard ice pouring outside. A goddamn coyote had raided the cooler, ruining our camping trip. Fearing its return, I clutched my gun in the tent and fired a warning shot when I heard footsteps, scaring it away. What really scared me was the footsteps sounded bipedal. This means whatever it was must have been walking on 2 legs, and it sounded heavy. Each footstep could be felt in my chest. It sent shivers through my spine. I just haven't experienced anything like it before or since. I jumped out of my tent to see nothing but blackness and firelight, illuminating the empty cooler before us. I don't remember what the hell happened. All I remember is sitting there staring into the woods. Ryan and Jacob yelled profanities at Jack, leaving me speechless, wondering what had invaded our campsite. A human wouldn't steal and eat raw ribs. The next morning we found spilled ice but no other damage. We theorized about the intruder but decided it was gone. We resumed exploring and had fun until sunset, playing music and enjoying dinner by the grill. Everyone else seemed relaxed but me. I had an uneasy feeling that I was being watched, but I couldn't tell what it was. But then, we heard the coyotes. Their graceful howl always calmed me down, their yapping at each other and their howling for whatever reason was coming to me. But then one of the coyotes made a completely different noise. It sounded as if it were being ripped apart limb by limb, eye by eye. It's the most brutal noise imaginable. It was the noise of suffering and pain. It made us drop our forks and wonder what just happened. We heard one more scream from the coyote, and then complete silence. The silence was the worst part. No noise at all. This wood was dead silent. All you could hear was the cackle of our fire. It was as if someone muted everything around us. There was something wrong with the desert, and we all knew it. We lost our appetites. The thought that something could rip apart an animal like that just didn't sit right. If it could rip apart a coyote, well, imagine what it could do to us. Suddenly, I didn't feel safe at all, like the 22 in my tent wouldn't be enough. Jacob was on the verge of tears. I have never seen anyone so scared before. We sat there just listening to any noise, but there was nothing. Just silence. So we decided to sleep it off and wait for daylight. I woke up again with the feeling of drowning. The powerful stench was too much to bear, so I took it out on puking. It was that thing looking for food once again. I figured that if this thing would return to our campsite, it must be related to the coyotes we had her being ripped apart earlier. I wanted to see it, but didn't want to stick my head out of the tent and be stuck with a mental regret for whatever I would see. But I decided it couldn't be too bad, so I unzipped the small window of the tent and froze in horror. It was a man. But as my eyes adjusted and it came closer to the firelight, did I really understand it was no man? The skin was pale with bare spots of exposed flesh. It looked extremely malnourished and skinny. It had a long streak of dark brown hair running down its spine. Its fingers were each around the size of a pencil, and just as thin as the face. The face is what struck me the hardest. It looked like the face of a man, but stretched out in a long and elongated like the face of a horse, but with the details of a man's face. It was pure evil, the way it moved. The way it looked as if it were uncomfortable in its own body. An amalgamation of everything you would expect to see in hell. Almost like every time it moved, it broke a bone in its body. It was tall, very tall, at least 10 feet tall. I was no further than 4 feet away from it. My heart was beating faster than it ever has in my entire life. I was crying, sobbing like a baby. After snapping myself out of the shock I was in, I slowly bent down to grab the 22, knowing if I miss it will see me, and there was no telling what could possibly happen next. I was shaking so badly that I had to press the gun against my chest to get a steady aim. I slowly unzipped the tent window zipper and fired. I hit it all right. It stood up and ran into the desert on 2 feet. It scared the living crap out of me. I was not going to step out of that tent. There was no way in hell. What if it came back? What if it ripped open my tent and ran off with me in its grasp? And then came the scream. It was horrible. The sound came from all directions, blowing out my eardrums almost. It's as if it sounded like someone was trying to make a woman scream, but out of the tune of a violin. It hurt my ears more than anything I've ever heard. There was no sleeping that night. I was wide awake, fully alert to anything and any sound that came by, but nothing further happened. Nothing at all. I was so scared that even in daylight, I was scared to step out of my tent. Everyone else looked sleep-deprived and scared for their lives. I figured they saw it too, but I did want to ask them. So we packed faster than we ever had before. No one said a single word for the entire drive through the woods. But when I stopped to pee, I started to smell that foul aroma that covered whatever that thing was. I didn't have any time to pee, and I just decided to hold it. We drove back to the paved road, which felt great because we knew we were out of there for good. On our way back, we stopped at a gas station to grab some food and use the restroom. I walked up to the cashier. She asked me if I was okay. I didn't say anything, but wondered why she asked. It was because my hand was still shaking so badly. She must have thought I had Parkinson's or something. Upon making it home to my parents, and they asked me why we came back so early, I just made some excuses of bugs, and that there had been too many people. I just didn't want to tell them about her encounter. I don't know what I encountered, a skinwalker maybe, but I'm not going back to find out. I and those friends meet up every now and then, but that is something we specifically avoid. We refuse to ever talk about it. It's something that still scares us. A few buddies and I who were Boy Scouts together back in the day like to plan a camping trip out to the woods every once in a while. Since we had that history together, things have always gone pretty smoothly. However, we've learned something that our Daisy Scouts didn't prepare us for. We were always trained to watch out for wild animals, poisonous plants, venomous spiders, and that sort of thing. We were never told to consider that even in the deep woods you can still run into people. I've got quite a few stories about encountering strangers in the wilderness, and while some of them are funny, I have an experience I would like to share that is far more disturbing. The encounter took place in my home state of Florida in early January. Two buddies and I booked a cheap primitive campsite for the weekend, but when we got there, we realized that the place wasn't exactly secluded. It was right on a dirt road just a few miles away from a rural highway. There were dozens of campsites lined up against the path all around us. Most of them were empty, but about 1 mile farther down was a family that looked like they were set up to live out there. Right across the dirt road from us was a strange man. He was by himself, camping out of his Subaru. He didn't say anything to us while we were setting up, but all three of us made note that he was watching us. Not only that, he had a large machete holster on his hip. From his general demeanor, we figured he was some kind of societal reject who chose to spend most of his time alone in the woods for his own comfort and the safety of others. The entire first day, he kept his distance. We weren't that far apart though, maybe 30 feet from the edge of our campsite to his. We had to accept that he would probably be listening to us all night. Luckily, the first night went fine. On the second day, he started warming up to us. A buddy and I ventured into the shrubs to gather firewood, and he came by and told us where we could get better material that wasn't all rotten out like the stuff we were getting. We said we would consider it, but he was acting way too suspicious for us to actually do it. He stuttered and drooled a lot, fidgeting his hand over the hilt of his machete like he was nervous, even scared stiff of us. It seemed like he was completely unadjusted to being around people. But after he tried to help us out during our first real interaction, we allowed ourselves to relax a little bit. If anything, he would be an entertaining neighbor for the weekend, and since we outnumbered 3-1, we feel like he didn't pose a threat to us. As the day wound down, there was an unexpected development. It started with just one car rolling through and parking in the campsite right next to the machete men. Immediately, we all started to watch for his reaction. He was clearly agitated by this, but it wasn't over. He looks on in awe as one car became 2, then 3, then 4, and eventually 5. It was a large group of purebred millennial city folk that booked 3 campsites right next to each other. It was unfortunate for them that they had unwittingly encroached upon the personal space of the machete-wielding hermit. The way he spied on us looks tame in comparison to the death glare he was giving these people. He tried to act normal, but it was clear his whole body was tensing up as he stared at them. Things almost got bad when the dog showed up. There were 2 dogs, actually, but the owners of one were letting the animal roam off the leash. It was only a matter of minutes before their dog ran over to the machete man's campsite and started to jump on him with typical puppy-like excitement. We heard the machete man literally bark back at the dog, and we all looked over to see this happening. The man was frozen stiff, like it was taking everything in his power not to snap, pull out his machete, and shoot the dog's head off right then and there. Quickly, the dog's owner ran over and contained their pets. And that's when we heard him say something alarming. "Next time a damn dog comes over here, I'ma shoot the bitch." We thought this would give the city folk the impression that they shouldn't just act like they own the whole place. But surprisingly, they were pretty unfazed. They kept their dog on the leash after that encounter, but as night fell, that became even more intrusive. Their dogs barked constantly, and there were several simultaneous conversations out of the 10 or so people there who were constantly shouting over each other so they could be heard, to the point where we could make out every single word some of them were saying. We spent the whole night in hushed tones making fun of the ridiculous out-of-touch things we heard from them. My friend came up with a pretty good impression of the most obnoxious of the bunch, and repeated everything he said with a mocking tone. Once our fire died down and the temperature dropped, we called it a night, crawled into our hammocks. It was pretty frigid by Floridian standards, so when I woke up at daybreak I was too cold to get up, so I shut my eyes to sleep in. The next time I opened my eyes, I saw that same friend crouched by the fire pit, trying to get the coals from last night to catch on. I wasn't in the mood to get up until the fire was going, so I shut my eyes again. Then a bit later, I heard voices. My eyes shot open when I realized that one of them was a machete man. He was standing over my friend who was crouched by the pit, well into our campsite with his hand resting on the hilt as usual. I pretended to stay asleep and listened to their conversation from my hammock. "Which one of you was doing that dumbass voice?" he asked. My friend stammered and eventually replied, "That was me." A brief silence called for me to choke up, half expecting the man to pull out his machete. That's not what happened, thankfully. Instead, he laughed awkwardly. "Man," he shouted, "you guys had me rolling in my tent last night." My friend sighs with audible relief. "Yeah, that's cool, man."
"We thought it was pretty funny," he said. That's when the machete man leaned in and muttered something else. "I'm serious, guys. I was this close. If you guys hadn't got me laughing last night like that, I was about 10 seconds from going over there with a 9mm and making them shut up." My friend was unable to come up with a response to this, understandably. So the man kept saying, "I hate when those goddamn city people come out here. They ought to stay in Orlando." "You guys ain't from there, are you?" No, we're not from Orlando," my friend lied. "We're from the Gainesville area." That's not too bad," he said. "Well, anyway, I'm gonna go back and try to get them to leave. See you all later." At last he turned around and walked back to his campsite. Once he was out of earshot, my friend looked at me, noticed my wide-open eyes, and asked, "Did you hear that?" "Yeah, man. Good thing we're leaving today, right?"
Right around then, our other friend woke up and crawled out of his hammock, totally oblivious until we filled them in. After that, we unanimously agreed to call off the trip a few hours early. We skipped breakfast at the camp and packed everything up, leaving well before 10 o'clock. We tried to pass it off as a joke, but when it was said, it sounded more serious than we wanted it to. I don't remember who said it, but one of us did. What if we get home and we see on the news that some guys shut up a whole campsite full of people from Orlando? Thankfully, that never happened. But when we left, it really felt like we were abandoning those people to their fate. I dread to think of what might have happened if we hadn't brought a sense of humor to that situation. We were definitely caught off guard by it, and I couldn't think of any other way to handle it. Nobody expects to be overcrowded when they go primitive camping. But unfortunately, this wasn't our last experience with the woodland hermits. I tightened the straps in my backpack and took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp mountain air. The Appalachian Mountains loomed before me, their ancient peaks reaching toward the heavens like gnarled fingers. As my friends and I ventured deeper into these mythical hills, excitement and unease settled within us. We were here to investigate the legend of the Brown Mountain Lights, a phenomenon that haunted these lands for centuries. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie glow on the landscape. Shadows danced along the forest floor, their movements accompanied by a chorus of nocturnal creatures. The whispers of the wind rustle the leaves of the trees and hold their secrets close. The tales of the Brown Mountain Lights have been passed down through generations, whispered around campfires on moonlit nights. Local folklore claims that these ethereal lights were the spirits of long-dead Cherokee warriors, forever trapped in an eternal battle. Others believe that we're lost souls beckoning wanderers into the darkness with cameras and recording devices. Our group set off toward the heart of the mystery. Our flashlights pierced the darkness, their feeble beams barely illuminating the path ahead. The rustling of leaves beneath our boots echoed through the stillness, a constant reminder that we were not alone. As we trekked more profoundly into the mountains, the air grew colder, wrapping around us like an invisible shroud. I think fog began to roll in, obscuring our vision and transforming the landscape into a spectral realm. The silence was broken only by the distant hooting of an owl, a haunting melody in the night. Suddenly, a flickering light caught our attention. We strained our eyes, trying to make sense of the otherworldly glow. It danced and wavered, defying all rational explanation. The Brown Mountain Lights had revealed themselves, heart-pounding. I reached for my camera, hoping to capture this phenomenon. But as I raised the device, the light shifted and disappeared into the forestettes, leaving us in utter darkness once more. A chill ran down my spine as an icy breeze swept past us, carrying whispers that seemed to originate from the trees themselves. Unease settled within our group, Curiosity drove us forward. We pressed on our senses, heightened alert to every creak and snapped in the undergrowth. The forest seemed to close in around us, branches reaching out like skeletal fingers as if warning us to turn back. Then we stumbled upon an abandoned cabin. Its dilapidated structures stand as a testament to the passage of time. It emanated malevolent energy as it had witnessed unspeakable wars within its decaying walls. Reluctantly, we ventured inside, our footsteps echoing through the silence. The interior was adorned with faded photographs, relics of a forgotten era. They depicted faces frozen in time, their eyes hollowed and haunted. As we studied the images, a sense of foreboding washed over us. The atmosphere grew heavier, suffocating as if the cabin resented our intrusion. A creaking sound echoed through the cabin, followed by a gust of wind that extinguished our flashlights. Panic enveloped us, our frantic hands fumbling for the light switches. But when the illumination returned, we were met with a sight that froze us in terror. The photographs that once adorned the walls had vanished, leaving behind only empty frames. A single phrase had been scrawled in blood-red letters in its place. "You are not welcome here." A chorus of whispers echo through the cab and grow louder, and more frantic with each passing moment. Shadows danced on the wall, taking on twisted forms that seemed to mock our fear. Panic-stricken, we rushed towards the door, desperate to escape the clutches of whatever malevolence resided within those walls. As we burst back into the night, our breathing, heavy hearts racing, we realized we were not alone. The brown mountain lights had returned, their ghostly glow illuminating the surrounding trees. They danced and swerved, marking our fear as if they delighted in our terror. With our courage drained, and a newfound respect for the legends that played to these mountains, we retreated. The whispers followed us, carried on the wind with a reminder that some mysteries were better left unsolved. The legend of the Brown Mountain Eyes will forever remain an enigma etched into the annals of our collective nightmares.